And I found that each Suusi is defined by some particular event. So it becomes in our memory the Suusi the Suusi of the Thai nanny, or the Suusi of the couples enrichment class, or the Suusi there weren't enough AC dorms. A couple of years ago, the defining moment of our Suusi happened actually after we had left Suusi. We were headed for Charlottesville to visit my mother, and on the way we decided to visit the Taubman Museum, which was great. We took the kids, we had this fantastic time, and then afterwards we went to the museum restaurant for lunch. However, as we were parking, I had noticed that there was a little craft market in the town outside the museum. And I wanted to go to the craft market, but my family did not want to go to the craft market. And so we decided that I would go out to the craft market while my family ate their lunch, and I would come back in 20 minutes and we would reunite and get back on the road. So that's kind of unusual because my family often leaves me, but I do not tend to leave my family. I think of myself as the gravitational force which holds my family in orbit. They come closer, they drift farther away, but I am always there, like the large mass at the center, holding everybody in place. So it was, as I said, kind of unusual for me to do that. But I decided that the lure of petite pillows and scented candles was stronger than my need to be in place at that time, and so I left everybody to hold their own orbit for 20 minutes, and I left, and I went, and I shopped, and I came back. 20 minutes later, the family was not there. They were gone. They were not in the restaurant. They were gone. So this was unusual because one of my husband's many stellar qualities is that he is very reliable. If he says that he's going to meet me at 8 o'clock, he's there at 5 minutes to 8. And I thought this was one of the indicators that he would be a really good husband, because I figured if he could meet me on time in restaurants, he would also be standing at the end of the road 50 or 60 years down the road, as he promised. So it was disturbing that he wasn't there. I'd let down my gravitational force for just a few minutes, and suddenly everybody had gone wildly out of orbit. So I began to search for my family. They were not in the lobby, they were not in the courtyard, they were not in the restrooms. I could not find them, and so finally I went back to the restaurant and I asked the cashier, "Have you seen my husband, a man with 3 little kids?" And she said, "Oh yeah, I think he's out back going through the trash." Going through the trash? I mean, what happens? I go away for 20 minutes and suddenly everybody is gone out of orbit. So I went out back, and there indeed was Alan going through the trash piece by piece. Kids were not with him, nowhere in sight, and so I said very softly, "Alan, honey, why are you going through the trash, and where are the kids?" I spoke very gently in case he was having some sort of psychotic break. So it turned out he looked up at me and his face was stricken, and I knew something was terribly, terribly wrong. In fact, it turned out that Alan had lost his wedding ring. Yeah. His fingers had become swollen because of the heat here at Suusi, and so he had taken his wedding ring off, and he showed me the nasty red welt where the red wedding ring had been, and he put it on his pinky finger where it fit, but it was kind of loose. And so while he was eating his meal, suddenly he realized the wedding ring was gone. Alan is used to acting very quickly in a crisis. As a physician in the ICU, he knows that every second counts. And so he immediately mobilized the children, sent them fanning out across the restaurant, scurrying under the chairs and tables, looking all over the place. He went on the counter, he went over to the trash, thinking maybe it had fallen off while he was throwing away napkins, and no rings. So he cast a larger net, sent the kids out to the Touch Museum where we had touched, of course, every single thing, and he went and grilled the restaurant staff what had happened, where was the ring, and they said, well, in fact, they had emptied the garbage can since he had finished eating, and they put the garbage out in the dumpster, which is why I found my husband digging through the trash in the dumpster. So we spent 2 hours combing the museum, went everywhere, looked in every nook, all along the edges of the walls. We could not find the ring. And we finally left, very disheartened. Alan was absolutely disconsolate. But we couldn't find the ring. The funny thing is, this was not an incident without precedent, because the year before, I had lost my wedding rings at Suusi and my engagement ring, lost the whole set at Suusi. And so we began to wonder, like, you know, is there something at Suusi that doesn't want us to be married? Is this some kind of message from Suusi? Are we on the wrong path? But it's kind of late now. Anyway, it'd been the same kind of scenario. It was hot, my fingers were swollen, I took off the ring and put it aside for the night. But the thing was that my daughter Moxie, who was 3 at the time, was like a magpie, irresistibly drawn to anything that glittered. And so I was very concerned that she would find these rings when I took them off, and she would do something unpredictable with them, like give them to one of her 3-year-old friends, or maybe put them in a fairy house, or maybe eat them. This was what I was really worried about, that she was going to eat my rings. So I took them off and I put them aside, and the next morning I could not find them. They were not where I remembered putting them. They were not anywhere. I could not find these rings. And so I became convinced that Moxie had in fact eaten my rings. And so I spent the rest of Suusi eagerly waiting for her bowel movements, and then studying the toilet carefully, poking around in the toilet, which is why that is the Suusi of the toilet. And, you know, I don't think of myself as a superstitious person, but when you're looking for your wedding rings in somebody else's excrement, it seems like not a good sign. But so be it. Anyway, the week finished, did not find the rings. I was very, very upset, but Alan handled this beautifully. He said, Dahven, the rings are not important. That doesn't mean anything, because I will buy you a new ring, I will buy you a better ring. It's going to be so much more beautiful, because it will not represent only our hopes for the future, but also all the things we've already built together. And then he got down on bended knee and he proposed to me. So that is why, when Alan lost his ring, I knew exactly the right thing to do. So I said, Alan, honey, that ring is not important. That ring only means what we want it to mean. And this is like starting fresh. This is like sloughing off our old bad habits, and we'll begin anew. We'll get a fresh new ring. It's like a snake shedding its old skin. And beneath is the beautiful, unblemished skin. And then, of course, I got down on bended knee and said, Alan, will you marry me? Alan was completely unwilling to be jollied by this gesture. Alan said something like, you're comparing our marriage to a snake? Give me a break. And then he pulled me off my knees and we left without the ring. So he continued to fret about that ring. We got to my mother's house and he called the museum, no ring, and then he called the store where we bought the wedding ring and found out that the ring had been made in Germany, and then he got the name of the German jeweler and he was about to call Stuttgart, and I said, Alan, just hold on a second. Let's just give it a little time and see if the ring turns up. Let's just wait a little bit. And he agreed to this, but he really didn't like it, and he was very uncomfortable, and he felt naked and vulnerable without this ring, as though women might be swarming him on the streets, unable to control themselves when he didn't have that ring, which, as far as I know, didn't happen, but... So, what is the power of a ring? Does the ring really hold us in orbit around each other? Does it have some sort of innate power? Does the force of our beliefs give that ring something like a soul, some kind of essence? And could a ring even have like a will to be found or a will to be lost? I spent a lot of time thinking about this. I'm sure that everyone in the audience now has looked at my left hand. I'm wearing a wedding ring, still married. We didn't go out of orbit, we're still together. It all worked out. But the year that my rings were lost, we were almost the last people to leave Suusi. I dawdled and I procrastinated. I didn't want to go. We got the car all packed. The room was totally empty, and I went back to the room to give it just one last pass. I went into the bathroom, and there was this high shelf above the toilet, and I had to stand on my tiptoes. And there in the very, very corner of the shelf was a paper cup. And in the paper cup was, of course, my ring, where it was safe from Moxie's little hands, and also safe from my bigger hands, unfortunately. And the year that Alan's ring was lost, about a week later, I was getting ready to leave my mother's house. And I was rooting through the fridge looking for food to take on the road, and I found a bag at the very back of the fridge. And I realized it was the bag from the museum that we had brought our leftovers home in. And I almost threw it away because that food was too old, but something made me look in that bag. And there, of course, in the bag, was Alan's ring. And it was ice cold to the touch, but at its core, it was still warm, still very much vital.
Woohoo!